So as the final lecture in this particular module, we're just going to talk about removing a shard, or draining a shard as it's commonly referred to. And the first thing that I'm just going to talk about is some caveats, some sort of things to be aware of. First, removing a shard should not be done lightly. It's a fairly major thing, it's going to take some time, and in fact the time it takes is very closely related to and similar to the sort of concerns you have when you're adding a shard. So when we talked about that, we talked about making sure you add a shard well in advance. It's going to take some time for things to balance, for that shard to actually contribute to the sharded cluster properly. Similarly, removing a shard is going to be slow. And we'll describe how the drain actually happens now in a second, and it'll become obvious why it might be slow. It's not going to be quick. This is not going to be an elastic thing. You don't want to add and remove shards on a regular basis in order to increase and decrease capacity. The mechanism for doing so just isn't dynamic enough, isn't fast enough to do that as things stand. So what does removing a shard actually involve? Well, the process works like this. First, you run the remove shard command. It marks that particular shard as draining. The balancer will be moving all the chunks off, so you have to wait for that to happen. And then you've got to move any databases that have that shard as their primary off of there using the move primary command. And then finally you run the remove shard command again. And that completes the process. That shard will then have been completely removed from the sharded cluster. So to show you just that really quickly graphically what's actually going to happen. Before I explain the process graphically, what do I mean by the primary database, by the way? Well, every time you create a database, you'll have noted if we go in, and I've created a series of them here. So if we go use config, you'll see that the admin database has a primary of config, and all of the rest will have a primary that is one of our two test shards, rs0 or rs1. In fact, all of the ones I've created are on test-rs0. And that's just a function of it will create them all on there by default. It doesn't do any sort of round robining or balancing of where it creates them. So they're all going to be on test-rs0, which would mean that if I drained test-rs0, I would have to move all of these databases off with the move primary command once they'd been successfully drained. So that would mean I'd have to move off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 databases to the remaining shard rs1 before I'd be able to actually completely remove this particular shard from the cluster. So if you're on your MongoOS here and you issue a use test db and you do db.foo.insert a1 or something similar, that will create the test database, and when it does that, it will pick one of these shards to be its primary. And what that means is that's where that database will live. So let's say it puts it on shard 2. Let's say that the primary for the test DB is going to be shard 2, so it goes on here. And if you never shard that database, if you don't enable sharding on it, if you don't put a sharded collections in it, that is the only place that database will ever live. So it will only ever exist on shard 2 until you enable sharding on it, shard a collection on it. Shard 1 and shard 3 will have absolutely no idea that testdb actually exists. So MongoOS will say if you do any further inserts or you do any queries against your testdb, the MongoOS will know to always send that to just shard 2. Then if you decide to drain shard 2, remember shard 1 and shard 3 have absolutely no idea that this is there. So in order to be able to take this out and still continue to use testdb, you'll have to move the entire database over here, and that's what move primary does. So imagine we have our 3 shards. Each of them have, say, 100 chunks, nice round numbers. And we decide we've over-provisioned here. The traffic on this is only ever going to go down, and we want to get rid of a shard 3 and repurpose the machines that are in shard 3 elsewhere. So on the MongoOS, which is up here, we issue the remove shard command, and what it will do is it will mark this as draining. What that means is for any future balancing rounds, the balancer is running here, and the balancer has to be running for a successful drain of a shard. By the way, I've seen people get very frustrated with that. They have the balancer turned off, they run the remove shard command and nothing happens for multiple days because the balancer is actually turned off. So the balancer must be running. So it marks shard 3 as draining, and what happens then is in any subsequent balancing rounds, shard 3 here will be the default source for all migrations, and it will not be a target for any inbound migrations. So it'll be the default source for any outbound migrations that are going on. Just in case there are any migrations that happen from these two, it will not be a target. So that's what draining means. And eventually, all of these 100 chunks will get moved off. there'll be none left. There'll be down to 0 chunks. And the only thing left on this database then will be those primary databases. And those will be moved off at move primary. You run remove shard one more time, and in fact you can run remove shard anytime during this to see what the progress is. So you run remove shard first to kick it off, you run remove shard again before it's finished, and it will just tell you what the current status is, and then you run remove shard one final time after you've done your move primary work, and it will finally tell you that it has actually been removed successfully. So really quickly, we won't wait for this to complete because it could take quite some time. I've been adding quite a bit of data to our little test set here. But let's remove test-rs1. The first thing we need to check, as I mentioned, is the balance running? No, it isn't. So that's the first thing we have to take care of. Must have disabled that at some point earlier on. So now the balancer is running. Excellent. Okay, so what do we have to do? So there we go, we're going to run the remove shard command. We're going to pass in test-rs1 as the shard name. So you'll see, as soon as you run it, the draining has started successfully. State is started. Shard is test-rs1. And the note is that you're going to need to move primary on these databases, which is the reason why I picked test-rs1. It only actually has one database as a primary, just the test database, which exists by default. So there's very little that's going to need to be moved to clean this one up. Let's run that again. And you'll see that it's switched from started to draining ongoing. The state is ongoing, and it gives you how many chunks are remaining. So there's over 1,000 chunks remaining to be moved. As I said, I've added quite a bit of data to this as part of our testing, and one database left to be removed. So what will eventually happen is chunks will go down to 0, and DBs is going to stay at 1 until we manually intervene and do a move primary to move test off of there. So test-rs1 is going to be draining for some time. Just to show you how quite slow this is going to be, we're still on 1031, not much progress. So that's going to be going for some time. Eventually, 0, 1, you do a move primary, you run this one more time, and it will say removed. And when that is finally done, what will happen is this state right here will move to completed. And at that point, once the state says completed, you can shut down the processes running test-rs1 without any fear of any problems. One final little piece that will show about this particular process is that you can also see it in the shards collection in the config database. So let's have a look at that. Here's test-rs0, looks exactly as it did before. We've got our hosts, we've got our tags that we added in one of the previous modules, and we've got rs1, and you'll notice that it looks exactly the same except for this extra field that has been added here, draining true. So that's going to continue on for some time, and eventually we'll be able to actually remove it. See, we're down to 1023, state ongoing. So there you go, that's how to remove a shard.